So Jeff, I know you're a legendary coach, but still, can you like introduce yourself for the audience in Taiwan?
Yeah, my name is Coach Jeff Friday, and I started my career as a grad assistant strength and conditioning coach at Illinois State. And from there, I was hired at Northwestern University of the Big Ten Conference, which is a big conference here in the United States. And I was hired to basically work with the basketball department. I was there for 4 seasons, and then after that tenure, I was hired by the Minnesota Vikings of the National Football League. It's American football. I was the assistant strength coach there for 3 years. We had success, and so I became the head strength and conditioning coach with the Baltimore Ravens. Again, it's the National Football League. Had a nice tenure there, 9 year tenure. Um, the staff got fired after 9 years of that tenure. I was still under contract with the team. And so I took that year to really educate myself, and I became a certified massage therapist during that year off. Also became certified in what's called active release techniques, which is a chiropractic system, or it's a system of deep tissue massage. And then I was the director of strength and conditioning for a startup league called United Football League. And after that tenure of 1 season, I was hired by the Cincinnati Bengals in the National Football League as an assistant strength coach. That tenure, we had success. That tenure lasted 9 years as well. Fired with the staff, and then I became the head strength coach of another startup football league in the XFL, of the DC Defenders, and actually the XFL used the model of the UFL, which I was with prior, as the model for success, because those startup leagues, it's hard to have success. And so I was with the XFL, and that ended early due to COVID. And then I just recently came out with a book, and am sports training locally in the Cincinnati area, and just working, reacquainted with basketball and academies and other sports in the area. And so that's what I'm doing now: more speaking, talking, things like that.
All right. So I'm gonna start with how exactly do you start with basketball, then ended up with football? How exactly does that work?
So I had a passion for basketball. I played basketball in high school. And so I was hired by the men's basketball strength coach. At that time, I was the assistant strength coach at Northwestern University, a Big Ten school. Nowadays, schools have like 5 strength coaches for football. Basketball has one, plus GAs or assistants, and all the sports have one. Well, I was it. I was the assistant. And so I worked with men's and women's basketball, as well as other sports. And I asked the men's basketball coach, his name's Bill Foster. Bill Foster was an older coach, coached at Duke University, very decorated coach. And I said, Coach, would you mind if I travel with the basketball team to be with the guys and help out and serve? And he's like, sure, that'd be great. And so with traveling, which whatever city we traveled to, I'd always try to meet a strength coach in that city. And my heart was really to take the information and bring it back to the athletes that I was working with. And so we're playing in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Minnesota Golden Gophers, another Big Ten school. And so I called up the strength coach of the Minnesota Vikings, the National Football League, and I said, "Hey, would you mind if I came over and did a quick visit of your facility?" It was a Saturday in January, cold. I just happened to have a buddy that was in town, so he drove me out to the complex, which was in the suburbs of the city. I spent an hour with a strength coach, and while I was there, I said, "Hey, would you mind if I come back and watch you train the guys during training camp?" He said, "Sure." And so, the basketball season's over, it's summertime, and then in football, training camp starts towards the end of summer. And so I went to Minneapolis, and the Vikings held their training camp at a college called Mankato State. And back in those days, the football teams would go away from their complex, kind of sequester themselves, team building, just them. And so they all found a local college that was in close proximity, usually to the complex. And so I go to Mankato State University, and also back then, the teams took their weight room with them. And so the way they set things up is that they put a tent next to the practice field, and under this tent would be the weight room. And so it was a really neat setup. And so I go to the tent, the weight room, with my cup of coffee, expecting to watch the strength coach, his name was Steve Wetzel, train the guys. And so the way the structure was that in the National Football League back in those days, this is the early 90s, there was very few rules for contact in practice. And so what coaches would do, they would have a padded practice where you're wearing a helmet, pads, you're tackling. They'd have a practice in the morning and a practice in the afternoon, physical practices. And they would do this, every day of the week for many weeks, maybe with a Sunday off. Well, Denny Green, the head football coach, what he did was he had a morning practice of pads. He had the afternoon basically off with just a special teams practice where, just maybe 1/3 or half of the roster practiced. So the whole afternoon was set up to lift the entire team. And so it was a way to get recovery in as well as keeping your strength. And so the system that the strength coach ran was that they started right after lunch at about 12:30. Two players came every 5 minutes. And so there's 90 players in the roster. It was about a 30-minute workout. And so two players came, that lasted till about 4 or 4:30. And so it was a 4-hour time block. And so what happened was, let's say me and you are training together. So a coach would actually set my seat height, put the weights on the bar. I would go, you would go, Eric. He would set the seat height, set the weights. You would go. And it was kind of an assembly line fashion. And so I got my cup of coffee and I'm ready to watch these guys train. Well, it just turned out that he relied on part-time help to help him out, because that's a long weightlifting session with a lot of guys. Well, the part-time help didn't show up. So all of a sudden I got thrust into coaching during the workout. And so the way the system was set up was that the veterans, the older players, they came later in the afternoon for their lift, because after practice, they had lunch. The veterans could take a nap, relax. They come back for a later lift time, and that bleeds into dinner, meetings. It was a beautiful system. And so one of the last players to walk in the weight room, his name was Cris Carter. Cris Carter is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a wide receiver. And so because he was the last guy in the weight room, I ended up spending the most time with him. And so he is leaving the tent, leaving the weight room, and he turns around to the head strength coach, Steve Wetzel. He goes, "Hey, Wetzel, you got to hire that guy," referring to me. And so sure enough, 2 years later, I get a call from Steve Wetzel of the Minnesota Vikings. He says, "Friday," he says, "you're the second guy in my list." The first guy was at the University of Michigan, big time football program. but his wife was also a gymnastics coach. He's like, Friday, he's my first choice, but his wife's got a good job. So if he turns it down, you're my guy. Well, that's what happened. That guy turned it down. I got hired, and I went from basketball to football, and I ended up spending 21 years in the National Football League as a strength coach. And so I think what I like about that story in myself is that I was truly I was learning. I was visiting to learn. I wasn't really, my mind wasn't, hey, I got to get that job. And so it just happened naturally, and that's how I got in the NFL.
This is like the story is so exciting, you know. That kind of remind me like when I tried to like apply for like grad school and uh I did I just accidentally did a podcast with Adam, and after the podcast he just invited me here. That's I'm not saying it's the same, but it's like what you do, what we do. We just want to learn something and it ended up like this. It's really
Yeah.
exciting.
Yes. It's well, the thing about coaching is that it's a relationship driven profession. And so you need to typically have a relationship to get a job. When you're the athlete, that's not quite the case. The athlete is basically the talent level, skill level that gets them the job. Now, athletes will hang out or hang around or go to different teams with coaches through relationship because they know the system. But once that window for the athlete closes, it's done. Whereas coaches, it's really relationship driven. So I think that to get into the coaching profession, I think you have to put yourself in positions to meet people, to learn, and to be honest with you, I got my job at Northwestern because I volunteered as a women's college basketball coach. That's how I got my strength coach job. So when I was an undergrad at the university, I knew I wanted to coach. And so I was dabbling in different forms of coaching. And one of these ways was coaching women's basketball, as volunteering. And so when I put my application in to Northwestern University, there was 125 applicants, and they brought four of us in. And so I'm sitting there in the interview with the head coach, Bill Foster, and all of a sudden he starts asking me about my experience coaching women's basketball at a really small college. And this was before Title IX. Title IX is prevalent now. It's equality. It's equality between men's and women's sports. But back then in the early 90s, there was no Title IX. And so to be in an interview for a Big Ten basketball coach and have the coach start asking me about this small college experience at a women's college or women's team, what happened was the head coach at this women's team, the head coach at Northwestern, had a mutual best friend. And that best friend, that separation, it separated me from 125 applicants to get that job, just from volunteering, putting myself out there, doing a good job, competent, but that separated me. And what happened was when I got that job at Northwestern, they gave me the bin of resumes. But here, Jeff, you want these resumes? Sure. So I paged through the resumes, and in that pile, there was resumes of strength coaches that went on to do wonderful, wonderful things. But yet I got that job because of probably relationship. So it is really important for the young strength coaches coming in to rub elbows with other coaches.
Nice. You know what what I learned from your story also is like I talked to uh head strength coaches at the NBA. There's like multiple head strength coaches. And one thing I noticed, it's kind of same about all of your background is those guys didn't really work with basketball before they went into the NBA. It's just like you didn't really work with football before you go to the NFL.
Mhm.
So, in your experience, is that a thing that helped you grow as a coach, or that's kind of when you're at the league that kind of like mm, is it harder at the beginning?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple ways to answer your question. Number one, the strength coach that hired me, it was about the training system. And so the training system for basketball was similar to football in his eyes. Yeah, there's twists and turns that you make for the individual sport, but the basic philosophy was the same. So that's number one. Number two, there was a really big learning curve because I went from a college situation where you're working with 18 to 21 year olds to a pro setting where you're working from 21 to 35 grown men. And so there was a learning curve there because in the college setting, it was more, more. I'm not going to say dictatorship, but it was more. You tell the athlete kind of what to do. It was more rah rah, you know. Whereas in the pros, they just want good information. They want to know why you're doing what we're doing, how it can benefit them. And so, and not that a coach shouldn't do that at the college level, but I just wasn't as good at that time at explain the why. And so that really accelerated my curve is dealing with grown men who that was their livelihood. And you had to have your I's dotted, T's crossed, and really know why you're doing what you're doing, because otherwise they could they could not they could choose not to do it.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the human beings that we coach, they all have a choice. They can choose to do what you ask, or they can choose not to. And so there's a lot of things that go into it. It's relationship driven. It's how you articulate, how you educate. So there's a lot of things that go into it. So that really helped my learning curve.
Nice, I like it. So, want to like go back to the experience when you were in basketball and after like 10 years ago to football, right? So, what are the game demands from basketball to football? I know nowadays, since like maybe 20 years later, it's already like changed. But at your time, is the game demands different?
The biggest change was the demands of the sport as far as contact. So football is a collision sport. So I think that in the strength training realm, my vision, my goal is really number one to protect the body. So like if you would look at an injury report, whether it's the sport of football or the sport of basketball, an injury can occur anywhere in the body and be debilitating. And so, as a strength coach, we have to know the top injury sites and make sure that we are really think of a knight in shining armor going into battle with all the iron to protect their body. I feel as strength coaches, we are similar in that we want to protect our athletes going to battle, so to speak. So because football is a collision sport and some of the areas of high injury probability, that changed the workouts a little bit from basketball. But the actual strength training was really very similar in the philosophy that I was using. The demands were more the metabolic demands of football being a 5 second sport. The average play in football goes from about 1.99 seconds to about 12 seconds, roughly an average of 5 seconds per play. Whereas basketball, you can have periods of 15 to 20 seconds of high intensity, effort or moderate intensity even. So the conditioning demands they did vary. But the strength training demands, outside of a few muscle groups that you would really, really accentuate, the strength training was fairly similar.
Cool. So, um, when we talk about like sorry, so from basketball to football, um, and you were mentioning your thought process was like protecting your athletes. I thought at that time like it was about like uh peaking or like helping your athlete have much more power output. But you mentioned like protecting your athlete. I really like that mindset, but um why is like in your mind or in your thought process, why is it protecting your athlete first instead of like um helping like gaining much higher strength output, higher peak power output? Why is that?
I think that if an athlete gets injured, especially at the pro level, they are not available. And when you're not available, you lose your job. You get paid to play. So I think that having the athlete available is a number one goal. If you would look at, let's say, the National Football League, if you would look at the games lost by starters, if you have a lot of games lost by starters, there's usually a correlation of losses in games, losing games. And so if your best players are on the field playing, your chance of winning games is higher. So you really want to have your best players out there. And so that's where the mindset comes in of protecting the athlete. Because if the athlete's not out there, they're not going to help you. And as I mentioned earlier, that injury can occur anywhere in the body. So the way I look at the human body is just trying to train as many joint angles as possible to protect those muscle groups that work around those joints. I worked with a Hall of Fame offensive tackle, a lineman in pro football, and his career was cut short because the smallest joint in his body got hurt, his toe. Now, it's hard to protect the toe, but my point is that you never know where that injury occurs. And so I think that was a reason of the thinking.
The reason I like brought up this question is because I think nowadays there's like more and more sport tech. People are chasing like peak power, like max strength, whatever it is. And I personally I think that sometimes we get too much into the weed of like the numbers, the data. We lose the whole picture about like uh keeping our athletes healthy. So that's why like I brought up that question and I really love it. And it it goes back to like it kind of go back to when you were at Louisville, we have a discussion about like there's like science part of this strength training and there's art of coaching. So what do you think about like nowadays there's like more and more sport tech and we probably focus more on the numbers and compared to like probably old school like strength coaches, they focus on the person, they focus on the movement. I'm not saying that which one is better, but like your thoughts on this.
Yeah, my thoughts is that accountability is great. So you can get accountability in different forms. It could be from some of the sports science technology that's out there. It's simply from a workout card. If I have a workout card that shows me the best effort that I've ever done with an exercise, that is the end goal. And then the workout shows me what I did last time. And then what am I doing today? That's a roadmap, and that gives me that gives the athlete accountability. So within that workout card for that exercise, there's an opportunity for the coach to come in and offer encouragement, offer a touch point of love, a high five, a good job. And that's what accountability does. And so it could be as simply as recording one of the exercises you do in the weight room. It could be monitoring a vertical jump, the amount of force on a force plate. So I think all those things are important. I think that especially if we're talking about basketball, it's a highly skilled sport. Highly skilled. Me and you know, if you're watching a basketball game and you have a player with an open three and they miss it, that's not good. That guy's probably be sitting on the bench. So I think the skill is number one. Same with the NFL football. It's a highly skilled sport. So I think that's number one. And then I think that we try to accentuate those skills by adding some conditioning, some strength, some power, all those little facets. But sometimes I think that we have the blinders on sometimes, and we think that the weight room area is sometimes the most important area. And it's really not. It's really not. I mean, you look at in basketball, I mean, those major schools, they're getting the 5-star recruits, they're getting the talented players. They're getting the one and dones because they're going to the pros, and that's typically what it takes. It's the talent. And so I think that we can really augment and help that talent. And so there is no right or wrong. I think the accountability is good. But I think sometimes we put our energy into factors that maybe don't correlate to the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. I like it. So, I'm gonna jump to the next topic. At the time you're at Louisville, you gave us a presentation. I really like it. So you talk about like your career. So can we talk about like from like is it like 20 something or 30 years? 26 years of your career? Is it 26?
21 in the NFL, 4 years,
Oh,
6 years in college,
also 27.
27 plus two startup
Oh yeah.
football leagues, and then kind of what I'm doing now. So
So
28.
29,
So
28,
yeah,
28,
yeah, yeah.
29 years of like experience.
Mhm.
Um, for the younger strength coach, or like from people like me, I want to make it to like NBA or NFL. Do you have like some suggestion for like me? I want to grow as the best strength coach I can be at the best sprint coach I can be. So like, do you have some suggestion or recommendation for those young strength coaches?
Yeah. So when I was a young strength coach, I immersed myself in the literature. When I was younger, I started off dabbling with Olympic weightlifting. And so Olympic weightlifting is research driven. It's a sport. And so government systems provide the research for that sport. And so you get a lot of really good things from Olympic weightlifting as far as that goes. And that's what I learned as a youngster. And I had translated material from Russia, got my Olympic Weightlifting Federation certification, all those things. And so I think that as a young strength coach, you really want to study the X's and O's of strength training, whether it be the power training, speed training, even running, and the Olympic lifts, and just become well versed in all of the different methodology that are out there. I think that you have to also have your foundation on some principles. What is the principles that you adhere to? So for me as a young strength coach, one of the principles that I adhere to was how to do a repetition. When you're in the weight room, a coach, what are you coaching? You're coaching a repetition. So how is that athlete executing what you want? Games have been won or lost based on the repetition of a player missing a free throw. That repetition wasn't good. Or in the sport of football, the quarterback, American football, drops back, throws to the wide receiver who maybe ran the wrong route. That's a bad rep. The ball could get intercepted. Same thing happens in the weight room. And so what I was taught was the foundation of how to properly perform a repetition. What that means is that if you're doing a bicep curl, when you raise the weight, you try to eliminate momentum. You eliminate momentum because that momentum can take away from the muscle doing the work. Also, that momentum can create more force to the body than what it's used to or can handle. For instance, if I'm doing an overhead press, let's say it's a 60-pound bar, and I use like a jerk movement, momentum, that 60-pound bar all of a sudden becomes a 900-pound bar with force. And so if you look at the sport of American football, 1 in 2 athletes that walk in the weight room have a debilitating injury that will worsen with time. So the athletes come to you usually in a state where they've had an injury history and some debilitation. In basketball, maybe the ankle. Ankle is the number 1 injury site in basketball. Number 2 is the knee, and it's usually tendonitis. So if you create too much momentum sometimes, you can maybe exacerbate a problem. So you want to watch that raising of the weight so there's not a lot of momentum. You always want to, I was taught, you always want to pause in that end of the movement. That's an isometric contraction. So if we're talking bicep curl, raising is a concentric, pause is an isometric contraction. And then you want to lower the weight, eccentric contraction, under control, usually 2 times longer than it takes to raise the weight because you have gravity helping you with that weight. And so those are some checkpoints that I adhere to when I coach. When I coach, I'm always saying, hey, full range of motion, slow it down, watch the bounce. Those are my cues, and that's how I judge what a repetition is. Now, we could sit here and dialogue, hey, if you're doing a snatch or a clean, there's momentum. Yeah, there's, based on the exercises, there's different qualities we're trying to get. But in large, that's what I'm coaching. And so as a young coach, I would just make sure that they have the principles that are their foundation. And once you have the principles, you can play with all this different methodology, because back in 1992, there was a book called Designing Resistance Training Programs. The National Strength and Conditioning Association was promoting this book. And in this book, they had, I think, 20 to 30 different protocols for strength training. And in these protocols, all but one gave favorable results as far as body composition. The point being is that you can get stronger and change your body with all kinds of different programs. It's not rocket science. But as a coach, what are you hanging your hat on as far as what you're coaching? And so what I've learned in my journey is, number 1, do no harm. And so when I mentioned earlier about protecting the athlete from injury, as a health practitioner, that's a Hippocratic oath. Do no harm to your patient. And so if you go into that Hippocratic oath a little bit deeper, they talk about if you do harm, it's better if you had done nothing. So as a coach, I evaluate. I'm always evaluating the risk to reward. If the risk starts climbing above the reward, I won't do it. I won't do it unless it's dictated by the head coach, or sometimes the player through conversation wants to do it. I mean, there are times when that risk outweighs the benefit, but by and large, the reward's got to be higher than the benefit. My second lesson that I've learned is that time equals life. We only have so much finite time in our life. As a strength coach, I do not want to waste your time. It's too valuable. And I think that we can get caught up in wasting athletes' time by programming maybe too much volume. So you're wasting time with sets, doing maybe exercises that aren't going to help you get the result. And I think that's prevalent, especially now with social media, and you see something that's glitzy or catchy. I want to try that, when it's really what's the progression to get there. And so those are my two big things as I've learned through. And don't get me wrong, I've had athletes get injured right in front of me. So what I'm articulating is based on experience. When I'm talking to your audience, I'm not talking like down, like, oh, you got it. It's like, I've been there. I've felt the pain of someone getting hurt under my care. I've wasted someone's time. I've took time away from their life because I was doing stuff that wasn't really being efficient. And I think sometimes that comes down to how you coach a repetition. I mean, if you coach a repetition the correct way, and you come to the end of that set, whatever repetition range it is, you may have created enough of an inroad to create change. And so then as a coach, you may have to evaluate, hey, do I need to do another set or two more sets? That's kind of the art of coaching. Because like me, like when I have a headache, what I do is I'll take one Advil. And typically that headache will go away. So why would I take 3 or 4 Advil? And that's kind of what I'm talking about. As coaches, sometimes we want to dose too much when we don't really have to. We can get a result with less. And that's kind of what I mean by wasting someone's time.
I like it. I like it. So, besides those two lessons, for all those years of like career training athletes, have you ever like um make some mistakes? I don't know what, just like maybe like me, I like my athlete got injured under my watch. So how do you deal with those mistakes that you make?
Never do it again. Once, yes, to answer your question, yes, players have been injured right in front of me due to my coaching or my programming. And so I have taken that, logged it in my mind, and I will never do that again because the risk outweighed the benefit. And there's times when I've even programmed something and I'm watching it and no one got hurt, but in the back of my mind, I know that wasn't in the best interest of the athlete. But I did it anyway because the research says I should do it, or this coach says I should do it, and I know it's not in the best interest. So to answer your question, yes, I've been part of that, and that's how I've learned. I just vowed never to do that. I don't want to be responsible. I go back to the Hippocratic oath. It's better if you've done nothing, if someone gets hurt under your care, because some injuries you can't take back. If you hurt a low back, that's with that athlete for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
I met a gentleman the other day who was a college football player, and when I introduced myself and told him I was a strength coach, right away, this is 20 years later, he said, "Yeah, my strength coach hurt my back in
Oh
college."
no.
But that's the influence we can have as coaches, though. That's for your audience to know that we really can impact lives in a wonderful, wonderful way, but we can also do some harm. And even though the heart is really good and we're not trying to, sometimes we can do harm through our programming. And I liken the human body to a tire on a car. So when you buy a tire for your car, the car I got, it's an 80,000 mile tire. I expect to get 80,000 miles on that tire. Well, I think what happens as strength coaches, we take treads off of the tire of the athlete by what we do in the weight room. So it may not even show up in the weight room, but the stress to the joints, the ligaments, whatever we're doing, sometimes can maybe show up later in life in a debilitating effect from what was done in the weight room. So I think we have a grave responsibility with care with our athletes. And so everything should be scrutinized by the coach.
I like it. I love this. Last thing, okay? I know at the beginning you mentioned that you're at uh Minnesota Vikings and then uh Vikings and then
Baltimore Ravens after
yeah,
that.
Ravens and then Cincinnati Bengals, right? So for all those years of success, you have great success. But you also like got fired a few times. Did that like I I know you mentioned this when you were at Louisville and you brought this up at the first part of our conversation today. Does those like those like firing hit you hard and how do you get back from that?
The firings do hit hard. When you're in a community, when you're in a team setting, you're giving love to the athletes and other people in the organization, and you're receiving love. And then you're asked to leave that community against your will, really. That's very hurtful. And for me, that can stay with me for a while, especially when you live in the same city of the team you got fired with. When I was with the Baltimore Ravens, we won a Super Bowl. I was a head strength coach of a Super Bowl winning team and got fired, I think it was 8 years later of our tenure. The new coach that came in, he had immediate success, went to the playoffs right away. And that the human element that hurts. It's like breaking up with your girlfriend or someone you love. And so you have to learn forgiveness. You have to have, I think, grace for yourself, knowing that sometimes you do the best job you can, and it's going to happen, especially in pro sports where the bottom line is winning and losing. And so I think to get over that, for me, it was having a strong home, wife who I could talk with. There was a faith element, a relationship with God. so I could understand my purpose of why I'm here, why this happened. And I think that I've been fired twice, unable to get a job, both times. In my career, I was voted strength coach of the year in the National Football League. That's the highest accolade you can get. That's the highest. The lowest is being fired twice, unable to get a job. So there's humility with that. And I think that the faith, the purpose, when I look back, I'm a much better person, much better coach for what happened after the firings. What I mean by that is the experiences, the people I met, the learning. I mentioned earlier to you that when I got fired by the Baltimore Ravens, I spent a year of education going to massage school, which I couldn't have done if I was employed, getting my massage therapy license, getting my active release techniques. So I used that time a way to better myself. Bettered myself in the UFL. Then I got reinserted to the NFL. When I got fired from the Bengals, it was a different growth process. I was later in life. So the growth there happened more, I think, more spiritually for me. The pride, there's pride saying you're from the NFL. There is. Like with you, you're with the University of Louisville. Louisville is a major program. So when you're introduced as part of the Louisville staff, there's a part of you that's, hey, hey, look at me, kind of. I mean, that's the way it was for me in the NFL. You're at the highest level, and so there's an element of pride there. Pride is like a self-sufficiency, that you can do it all yourself. I had that, thinking sometimes maybe you're better than somebody else. And I think that spiritually, after my last firing, I've been stripped away of that in more humility, which is really, really good for me. And I'm in a really good place. So that I would encourage your audience that if their tenure does end, that there's something better on the other side of that.
I like it. I like our conversation today.
I want to add one other thing. Life is about adversity. Life is really about suffering. When you suffer, like a firing, when you suffer, you then develop perseverance. Perseverance, fighting through, fighting, that perseverance gives you character. It develops your character. And then that gives you hope. You're familiar with the super compensation,
Yeah.
where you have homeostasis, you have a training load or a stress, you dip down, and then you have recovery, and you're at a new level, right? You're at a 1% better, whatever it is. The same thing in life. That's the same thing. So me and you are at homeostasis right now, and then you lose a job. There's suffering. But then there's perseverance on your end. Through the suffering, you persevere. And then that perseverance gets you super compensate. And then you're developing your character. Because that's what life is. Life is overcoming those barriers. And there's new opportunities. So I want to encourage those young coaches, if they go through that there's something better for them on the other side.
I like it. I like it. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, can I give you one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So I want to encourage your audience that they can all be leaders in their realm. It could be the home, the weight room, doesn't matter. And leadership is not about how tall you are, how good looking, how articulate. That stuff doesn't matter. It comes down to three basic elements. Number one, being authentic, being real, being comfortable in your own skin. The opposite of authenticity is fake or phony. And I remember when I was a young strength coach and I was with the Baltimore Ravens, we had a 10,000 square foot weight room, real big weight room. And I was on the other side of the weight room from the entrance, the door. And we had a player by the name of Ray Lewis walk through the door. Ray Lewis is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, one of the best linebackers in the history of the National Football League. And I remember yelling across the room, "Hey, Ray, it's great to see you," you know? And later on, he comes up to me and he's like, hey, Jeff, why did you yell my name across the weight room? I said, well, I was glad to see you, but the reality is I didn't do that for everybody else. So I was not being authentic. So be authentic, number one. Number two, have humility. Humility is not thinking you're better than somebody else. It could be listening to someone's ideas, being a team player, because the opposite of that is what we just talked about, and that's pride. And pride, that self-sufficiency, I'm better than you, that is really the downfall of man, is pride. The devil or Satan thought that he was better than God. And so there's an order to everything we do. It's God up here, and then there's an order, and we're down here some. But there's like in our family, the man, the woman. Well, Satan thought he was better than God, pride, and so he got cast out of him. So be authentic, be humble. Number three, have courage. Courage to confront for what is right. And so all three of those areas are areas that I've struggled with. It can be a daily struggle. It can be a seasonal struggle. I mean, when you're a head strength coach in the National Football League and a player walks in a minute late, it takes courage to confront that player. And so I really had to develop that courage. So I just want to encourage your audience that they can all lead from where they're at. You don't have to walk out there for the coin flip, at half court. You don't have to be the head strength coach. You can lead from anywhere. Be authentic, be humble, have courage. People can find me. I have my website is jefffriday.com. I do have a book called Built for Winning, builtforwinning.com. And that book, all it is I think there's a deep hunger for all of us to get on the other side of the curve, the bell-shaped curve, the performance curve. That's where our conversation was a little bit today. How do you get to the other side of the curve as a coach and as a person? And that's what my book does. My book gives you strategies to help move you along that curve. Built for Winning.
Nice. Wait a sec.